they think, oh, I have to spend all this money to go get a 4-year degree. I have to spend all this money to do this. Honestly, all you really have to do is find your community, work with them, and just absorb as much knowledge as possible.
I wanted to go to Silicon Valley because I thought that was the promised land. It was the Mecca. But every time I tried to apply, I got rejected.
When we did that poll on LinkedIn, the poll basically said that the hardest part isn't breaking through, it isn't breaking out of cybersecurity, it's breaking in. One of the things that I wouldn't say we have a disagreement, I would just say we have a difference of philosophy is just how technical do you need to be to break into cybersecurity, right? There's different phases in a cybersecurity career. A lot of folks find the beginning part the toughest. From your perspective, like how technical does every cybersecurity practitioner need to be?
Depends on what you do. In my heart, I think everyone that is touching technology should have some technical expertise, whether it's in programming or just maybe in tool usage.
Yeah, I think tool usage is huge. The more people can get their hands on code, I think the better. But I do think that there's places where you don't necessarily have to be uber technical to be successful in cybersecurity. One thing we talk about all the time is breaking into cybersecurity. And I don't think it ends there. It goes through how do you break through? How do you make yourself known in cybersecurity? How do you become the mentor? How do you become the example for other people to follow that are coming into the space? And sometimes we have to figure out how do we break out?
Right.
So when we talk about breaking in, I think you and I have similar but very different ways that we came in. I came in through the Marine Corps. That's really where I got my chops. I was at the National Security Agency, which was great, but I had to do these like small pivots to get to where I wanted to be in the cybersecurity industry. I had to pivot from the original intelligence that I was doing to a more technical, very computer-centric intelligence. And then from there, I went to United States Cyber Command when I became a contractor. So slowly but surely getting there. But even then, I wasn't to the level where I needed to be for industry. So I went back to school. To school, started getting some certifications, understanding the lingo. But the biggest jump for me was when I started my own company. Started my own company, standing up threat intelligence capabilities. And that's how I really learned about all the tools that everybody was using in industry, because government tools and industry tools are very different.
Right. So what about you? How would you say it? Would you say that people working in cybersecurity should be technical, or do you think it's something else?
I think it's a sliding scale. I think if you are an engineer, absolutely. A security engineer, you should really understand how to build in some type of language. You should really understand how to connect devices, connect solutions, connect data sets. But I think sometimes you're going to have folks that are really focused on things like policy and legislation. I think that's definitely needed in cybersecurity with all the stuff that's coming out around the world, all these new rules, all these new legislations that come out. So people need to understand that.
Right. You know, we've both worked in security operations one way or another, whether it be incident response, threat intelligence. And whenever I'm working with a compliance team, you know, there's some element of should this person be technical or should they not be? Because when you think about the questions that they're asking, like, do you have this security control here? Do you have access control here?
Right.
It almost seems like, how do you know whether or not someone is actually validating that information or if it's just a checkbox?
Right. Here's a question that's going to throw you through a loop. What exactly is technical to you?
Right. That's a good question. What's technical? I think it's the ability to be tactical in one way or another. I think tactical is something hands-on, whether it be hands-on, you're manipulating data in a spreadsheet, you really understand the numbers or how to use the tools that are going to affect the numbers, or it could be programming, like you understand the programming code or the security logic behind something, a workflow. But I think it's having some ability to use your tactical skills.
AJ On talks about being like the technical compliance person or the technical auditor. He's like, you should be technical in your space. So I do think that within the different functions within cybersecurity, I think being technical is very different. For me, coming up as a threat intelligence analyst, I thought I was pretty technical.
Right.
Now, did I do a lot of coding? No. Did I even do a lot of scripting? Not at all. But what I did learn is how do I utilize the tools internal and external to the organization to make decisions, paint the story from a technology perspective, paint the story from a threat perspective. So I think that there is like different shades of gray when it comes to being super technical.
Right.
But what we're finding today is that more folks are coming up from the engineering track. Like you're seeing more organizations that are like, hey, we're going to do security operations, but it's going to be from a very engineering mindset.
Right.
Similar to Netflix. Netflix, some of the best engineers in the world. Hands down, you really can't dispute that. And they were very focused on ops, being very engineering focused. So even the engineers, they were the ones running incident response, which is really, really interesting because now you have this like SOC-less model. But when you broke into cybersecurity, what were some of the hurdles that you found?
When I was first learning about cybersecurity, I got started because I was hanging out in chat rooms on AOL Instant Messenger, you know? And me and my friends, we used to join in on AOL Instant Messenger and talk about sports. My favorite player was Kobe. And if you had another favorite player, there was trash talking. One day, I was trash talking the wrong person, and they used this feature of AOL, and it was called direct message. And it allowed you to send someone a file. I was around 14 at the time. I double-clicked it, I opened it, and I realized something was not right. My CD-ROM tray started opening and closing, and then my computer started restarting, and the screen was going black with green text. It was almost like I was in the Matrix. So I joined the chat room again, and I said, hey, how'd you do that? And this person must have been a teenager too, because they told me how. So I did what any other responsible team would do again, and I sent it to all my friends. They showed me how to do it. I downloaded this file, I sent it to my friends, started playing tricks on them. And what I learned is that is about as technical as I like to go personally. I like to use a tool, use a piece of software, and perform my work. When I started to learn more and more about cybersecurity, computer networking, I acquired a lot of knowledge, but I never had to do the typing. I remember getting my CCNA and never configuring a router ever.
Really?
Only in the lab, never in production, never for a telco company. And I think it's the same for me working in cybersecurity production environments. I really appreciate helping the person making the change, but I don't want to be the one making the change because I like to have general knowledge. I like to understand a little bit of XDR, a little bit of SOAR, a little bit of asset management, but not really going a mile deep on any.
People used to talk about script kiddie this, script kiddie that. I think those days are pretty much gone. Everybody's using somebody else's code because why are you going to start over from scratch? Why are you going to, I mean, I can understand like going to the basis from a knowledge standpoint, but why recreate different applications, open source tools? Like you don't do that. You stand on the shoulders of giants and that's what you do. But when I think about people breaking in today, when we did that poll on LinkedIn, the poll basically said that the hardest part isn't breaking through, it isn't breaking out of cybersecurity, it's breaking in. And what baffles me today is it's still difficult for people to get roles. And I think the main reason why it's difficult for folks is because they don't get a lot of that tactile, actual practice in the paradigm that they're looking to get better at.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to who wants to get their hands dirty. You know, a lot of times when you're speaking to hiring managers or even just leaders in cybersecurity, they're asking candidates, do you have your home lab? Do you have a lab in the cloud? Are you tinkering one way or another? And I think that is a good way to get kudos and brownie points, whether you know that technology in and out or not. But the people that aren't at least practicing or trying it, it's another knock on trying to break in. Because if you don't have the experience and you haven't had your hands get dirty, then it's going to be very difficult for someone to trust that you're going to make the right decisions for their organization.
I think the secret to convey is passion, right? You want to show that you're passionate about this particular thing, whether it's cybersecurity across the board, whether it's threat intelligence, incident response, security analysis, whether you're talking about threat hunting. It's just finding people that are super, super passionate about what they do. And so when somebody goes into an interview, they're trying to convey that passion.
Right.
If somebody says, oh yeah, I have my Security Plus and that's all I've done, it's going to be hard for someone to say, okay, I'm going to give this person a chance. But if they've, gone to school or they've done Security Plus, or maybe they haven't done any of the traditional education stuff, and what they're doing is they're tinkering at their house. Maybe they have a group that they're working with. That's the stuff that I think hiring managers are looking for. But people are always told, like, let's go, first we have to go to certifications. First we have to go to our traditional school.
Right.
But that might not be the play for a lot of folks. Because number one, sometimes certifications can cost a lot of money. And the people that are looking to break in, maybe they're coming from a lower socioeconomic level. Maybe they're, bussing tables, but they've had this passion for cybersecurity. They have this passion to solve puzzles. But they think, oh, I have to spend all this money to go get a 4-year degree. I have to spend all this money to do this. Honestly, all you really have to do is find your community, work with them, and just absorb as much knowledge as possible.
So you had a degree in humanities, right?
Yeah, with a minor in cybersecurity.
Oh, with a minor?
Yep, minor cybersecurity.
So would you say that the humanities degree helped you with your cybersecurity experience?
100,000%, and here's why. In my humanities degree, it was really focused on the arts of humanity, whether you're talking about film, you're talking about writing, poetry. When I got into threat intelligence, I was really focused on telling that story. And sometimes in threat intelligence, you're just given pieces of data.
Right.
You just see little pieces, and you're supposed to tell this story and have a confidence level, a likelihood. Like, I'm super confident based on the information that I have that this is what the story is. This was the intent. And this is what they were ultimately looking to do on our network.
Right. So when you look at just even being in the military, because you were in the military for how long?
I was in the military for 5 years.
So military versus the humanities degree.
I'm going to put you in the place.
Which one do you think you use the most now? Because I'm sure there's like very valuable lessons in both, and both help you tell a story or do something technical. Yeah,
I would say my time in the Marine Corps honestly set me up for the rest of my life, because my Marine Corps time is what enabled me to get my degree with the GI Bill. My military career is what brought me to the National Security Agency to get exposed to these different technological paradigms that honestly a lot of folks take for granted. But now I'm looking at the whole breadth of my entire career. Because at first, before I went to the Marine Corps, I went to school and I wasn't the best student, but I was a philosophy major. I loved logic and argumentation. I loved pontificating about the world and how things fit together. And so my mind was always analytical, but I didn't know how to apply it from a technical means. But then I got into CCNA stuff. I got into A+ stuff around high school. I said, hey, how do I learn more about this computer stuff? And they said, oh, just go get a book. So I took my school clothes money to buy this A+ book. It was like this thick. It was like $75. And my stepmom was like, Chris, I know you didn't spend all that money on that book, but now she likes to take credit for all this.
Remember when I let you buy that book?
Right, yeah. Remember I told you to go buy that book? Yeah. But I felt I read it like a novel, because I love knowledge. I love learning. You call yourself a lifelong learner. I would say I'm pretty much the same. But what's interesting is it wasn't even necessarily the knowledge. I love to read. I was a big reader. That was how I escaped from the realities of being a teenager. I would read all types of books, and I read that A+ book like a novel, just going through it, trying to understand. And so I would go to my friends and I'd ask questions. I'd say, oh, what is this? And they're like, wow, you're picking this stuff up. But I wouldn't be able to use that knowledge until I joined the Marine Corps.
Being here at this studio, it makes me feel like home. And it feels like a homecoming in some way, because I got started officially my career in a spot just like this, a studio just like this. I was working at a public access channel when I was 16 or so. I also went to Explore Vocational School. Halfway through the school day, from 16 to 18, I would get on a bus and go to another school. And they would teach us about CCNA and how to be a Cisco certified networking engineer. And I would pick all of this stuff up, and people would come to the school and give us mock interviews. So one day, someone came in to give us mock interviews, and they liked me so much because my ability and my willingness to learn They were like, hey, this has nothing to do with CCNA and networking, but do you want to work at a public access TV station? And I was like, yeah, of course. If it's a job, I would love to.
Yeah.
So I was working at this place for about 6 months, and I would bring my CCNA books. So I was still going to that school. And there was this gentleman that walked in. His name is Marcus Carey. And he looks at me and smiles, and he's like, oh, you're reading a CCNA book. And I tell him, like, oh, well, I'm a hacker, but this is going to help me, hack more people.
Right.
He thought it was hilarious because he was already in cybersecurity. He was already an entrepreneur. And I had never met anybody like this. The person that sent me that virus on chat all those years ago was nothing compared. So I started to ask him questions like, what do you mean you're doing cybersecurity? What are you talking about? Right. I thought this was just hacking.
Right.
So he started to ask me questions about Linux, ask me questions about how does the operating system work? How do you code? What languages do you code in? And he was like, well, how about this? I'll help mentor you to get a job in cybersecurity. I was really excited, but I was also dreading the idea of going to college. That was never on my roadmap, never really a plan for me because I didn't have the money. But he said that if I did two things, if I got a network plus and a security plus along with my CCNA, I can get a cybersecurity job right out of high school. And I would meet up with him at a coffee shop, and we would meet up here on Sundays, and we would just learn about networking, learn about how Windows patching worked, Patch Tuesdays. We would look at the patches, we would try to reverse engineer them. Back then I had no luck, but that was just my process. I would rinse, wash, and repeat. And just doing that for 2 years, I didn't get a job right away. I just didn't apply. I didn't have the knowledge or experience to know that I have to apply more than once. I can't just apply to one place and call it a day. So after my third year of just studying and researching without a degree, I was able to land a job at one of the top consulting companies.
Would you say it was more about the hands-on keyboard, the practice that Marcus was taking you through that really got you the job at the end of the day? Or would you say it was more the certifications and the knowledge that you had to gain by getting those certifications?
I think it was by putting myself in the situation to learn everything about the technology. I knew everything about how HTTP worked. I knew a lot about HTTPS, even though there wasn't a secure method for web traffic. It wasn't popularized at that time, but I knew so much about it. I knew what happened if I turned my computer on, typed in google.com. I could tell you the whole process from start to finish. So I felt very comfortable at least filling in the blanks of any topic. If someone wanted to quiz me on incident response, I would ask questions about the environment. What kind of environment am I in to where I'm responding to an incident? If someone asked me about network analysis, like, okay, well, am I looking at encrypted or unencrypted traffic?
Right.
What kind of tools do I need to leverage and understand this data? I had a strong confidence in that after working with Marcus all those years.
Yeah, that's pretty serious. When I think about people breaking in today, honestly, I feel like it's a little difficult. Right. It's a little difficult because there's so many pathways to go. I mean, back when we were starting, I mean, really you got a workstation, maybe a laptop if you're super fancy, maybe it's connected to a server, maybe there's some networking going on. But beyond that, I mean, it's really just understanding like how things work and getting hands-on keyboard and figuring out some code. Today, I mean, things have dramatically changed, right? Now we have IoT, now we're cloud native. We have all these different aspects of cybersecurity. And I think in the beginning, it's hard for people to understand where do I need to go. And what I like to tell folks is based on what you want to do. Like, how does your mind work? Are you super analytical? Are you super systematic and making sure that everything is lined up? Are you a creative, right? Some people think, oh, if I'm a creative, I can't be in technology. But being in technology and being creative, if you are writing code, you're creative. Because when you're trying to take something that doesn't exist and bring it to reality, there has to be that creative aspect. So I think once people understand that, oh, wow, I can be creative in this thing called technology, I think it really opens up people's minds and they start to look for where they fit in to the space.
So you get dropped back in time, 12, 15 years ago, whenever you started cybersecurity, officially after the Marine Corps.
Right.
You get dropped back in time and you are left with just the skills of the military and your humanities degree.
Yep.
How do you navigate the cybersecurity industry today?
First, you have to lean on your strengths. And my strengths was pulling together stories, understanding the story, understanding narrative. I spent a lot of time speaking generals, spent a lot of time writing products that had to convey my message. Like, okay, I believe this because of X, Y, and Z. So that's what I leaned on, was that sort of that experience. And slowly but surely start to pick up pieces. If you try to take on everything, it might be overwhelming for some. Some people it might be a kid in a candy store. I would say in the beginning, when I got into threat intelligence from an industry perspective, I was a kid in a candy store. I wanted to use every single appliance. I wanted to use all the threat feeds, all the different things that were connected. And it was fun for me, but I could see some people being overwhelmed by that environment.
Right. And back then, there was a lot less resources. We would have one book, a few books, and you would just be like, all right, well, this is the Bible.
This is it.
But today it's a lot different. And for me, I would probably do what I did all those years ago and do it over again, but harder. And that's lean on the community. You mentioned it. Just meeting this one person propelled my entire career, changed my whole life.
Yep.
And not only did I meet Marcus, but I met Johnny Long, I met Joe McCrae, I met this other gentleman named Chad Price who helped me get my first consulting role. And throughout all these years, I've only applied for one job without knowing someone. And that was just more to see how it goes. Like, can I have more success with my community, or are these job boards really as strong as they say they are when you look at all the popular ones out there? And I would say they're not. You have a lot more opportunity for success when you know someone, because you're their referral. They want to see you succeed. That's why they brought you to the company in the first place.
Right. I would say breaking in right now is probably the most difficult for the folks that are already working age. They're already doing something out there in the world, but now they have to make this pivot. They have to go above and beyond after hours.
Right.
I was invited to this high school in Connecticut. It was during the summertime. The NSA, they have this thing called Gen Cyber. I was invited by Abe, who runs the program for this school in Connecticut. And these kids, they were programming, they were learning OSI model, they were learning everything that somebody would need to get into the space.
Right.
And I thought, wow, imagine if we had some type of resources like that when we were younger. So from that perspective, I think for the younger generation, it's easier for them to get in, because now they can be exposed younger. It's to a place where I think it's becoming more widespread. People are more interested in it. People are starting to realize that they can make a living. So it's easier for kids to get access to that data. But now I feel like it's still tough for the people that are already adults that are trying to pivot into it. Because when you want to pivot, you really have to make it a priority. If you want to work out, you have to make it a priority. And that can be tough, especially if you have kids, you have a job. Some people have 2 jobs, but they want to make that change in their life. What is that tenet of learning that you have that you're like, if I want to learn something and do something that I'm not doing yet, this is what I do first?
If you want to do it professionally, you have to find out what people are willing to pay for.
Right.
If you want to learn how to break into all the devices out there in the world and be like maybe a bug bounty researcher and hacker, there's not a lot of opportunities for working in the enterprise. Maybe you're gonna work on a red team, but there's really just very few teams that are gonna be breaking into applications or devices all day, every day. So you have to really find out what it is that you want to do, and are people willing to pay for it?
Yep.
What I like to do, and what I always recommend anyone new breaking into the field to do, is look at job requirements.
Huge.
It's the roadmap, it's the Bible.
That's it.
Unfortunately, there are some inconsistencies with what's on a job rec and what's the reality for the position, but it's at least the starting point. And you can always fall back to those requirements if you ever find yourself in a pinch in a job interview.
Yep.
Whenever I was in a job interview and I didn't know something, I would mention something about one of the job requirement bullets.
Right.
I would say, I don't know much about this topic, but maybe I could, provide more of my expertise in these 3 other bullets. And that can be a primer for them to ask you new questions that are more relevant to your experience. You want someone that's malleable, someone that can learn on the fly, that's going to be flexible with how your team's operating. Because I would imagine, just even being in the military for 5 years plus, that your job changed over time, even though you didn't change positions. The technology changed.
Yep, technology changes. We talk about mental agility all the time because things in technology change. If you learned technology 15 years ago and you tried to apply those same concepts, some of them might work, but a lot of things are very, very different. I love the fact that you brought up the job requirements, looking at a job listing and saying, okay, these are the things that they're asking for. I had a buddy of mine in Mandiant, he didn't have any cybersecurity experience. And so he went to the website. He was like, I want to work for Mandiant. Went through all the stuff. Okay, I need to learn this. I need to learn that. And he got the job. He's still there at Mandiant to this day. And I think that's something that people should really look at. But I'll also say that even though you might not have all of the pieces to that job rec, you still might be able to get it. You might still get that job. Even if you're missing 30% of it, I still think you should give it a shot. I'm pretty audacious. I have a high risk tolerance, so I'm always putting myself in situations like that. But that was one of the things I think that made my career really nice, is that I was willing to always go out there and have those conversations, take those interviews, even if I wasn't necessarily looking. One of my earliest mentors said, always be willing to have a cup of coffee with someone. So when someone reaches out to me for a job, as long as it's not completely off base, I think it's something that's super useful for folks that are trying to break in.
My mom didn't actually know that I was going to be born with a birth defect. It used to bother me quite a bit.
She is just like you guys.
The message of control and complexity doesn't just apply to one subject in life. That is a universal truth. When a challenge feels too big, break it down to the parts that you can control.
If you go from breaking in to breaking through, making yourself known, that was probably the toughest part for me, because breaking in, sure, I had to go to school, sure, I had to, do some certifications, I had to learn some stuff, but becoming somebody that people look to as an example in the space was difficult, because me coming from classified, it wasn't like I was out there on stages all the time. I spoke to generals internal at NSA or Cyber Command, but it was that one talk, that lightning talk that I did at SANS 2019 is what changed everything for me, because I was like, you know what? I'm not going to just sit and keep all the experience, all the knowledge, all the ideas that I have to myself. I want to give back. I didn't have any slides. I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to go up, let it rip, and whatever happens, happens. Jen Santiago, she manages all the speakers for SANS Summits, came up to me and was like, that was great. We need to connect. And she was the first one to ever offer me a keynote later in the year. But there was a lot of practice that went in between that first lightning talk and my first keynote. We basically hacked, how do you present yourself and build your personal brand in cybersecurity? We started really leveraging things like LinkedIn, building that network, because I think personal branding gets a bad rap.
It does.
People say oh, personal branding, that's just being conceited or egotistical. I don't think so, because there are folks out there that are looking for people to lead them, whether it's leading them from a mentorship perspective, just being an example, or even leading them oh, I want to work for this person. Hiring, so much easier when you have a personal brand. Moving from one role to another, so much easier when you have a personal brand. So I think personal branding stuff is important, but behind personal branding, you have to have the experience, you have to have the knowledge, you have to understand, how do I convey really complex topics in a way that's so simple that a lot of people can get it across the board. One of the things I'm super proud of is my ability, when I do keynotes today, I don't just talk to one audience. I talk to the cybersecurity practitioners, but I can talk to, in the same breath, talking to a student, talking to an entrepreneur in the cybersecurity space, talking to a CISO. And that's what people were coming up and telling me, that they appreciated that I was speaking to everyone. Because some people might feel left out when you get too indexed on one side or the other.
One thing I've noticed about your mentorship, and when I see people coming to you for mentorship, it's the way that you mentor people. It's not about always breaking in or breaking through or breaking out, but it's almost about standing out. How do you make yourself stand out? You talked about presenting at SANS and doing it with epic proportion, because they came back to you. And one thing I've noticed is whenever someone sees you at a conference, they say, hey, Chris, how do I become a unicorn? How do I start a podcast? How do I create content? Because they want to break through. They want to show their skills and display it to acquire a new opportunity or just try out something new in cybersecurity. So what would you say is your roadmap that you propose to people to help them break through in cyber?
It's funny, when I think about performance, you would think that I would go back to like my wrestling days of being an athlete, went to state championships a couple times. But honestly, I didn't really understand standing out until I started dancing. When I danced before the Marine Corps, I had a great coach. I had somebody that was teaching me, how do you learn something that's very complex? By learning something complex, you have to break it down into its most basic components. So from a dance perspective, different styles, different movements, dance with just one arm, dance with the other arm, dance with this leg, right? Breaking it up. When you're looking at breaking through, when you're trying to say, hey, I'm here, this is what I've done, you have to really get good at communication. You have to understand, how do I tell my story? How do I convey something that's really complex in its most simple form? Practicing those little skills is really what's going to help you stand out. A lot of folks, they say, oh, you're such a natural speaker. I don't think I'm a natural speaker. For a lot of my time in my career, I was very quiet. I mean, if you see me around a bunch of people that I don't know, I'm super quiet. I don't say anything at all. But when you see me up on stage, it's very practiced. That's where growth is. Right. Growth is where we're uncomfortable. Even that feeling like, ooh, this just doesn't feel right, it feels awkward, that's growth. Believe it or not, even though it's not comfortable, it's growth. So breaking things down in its most basic components, figuring out, okay, how do I improve intentionally into this thing that I'm looking to learn? And then what are some of the cheat codes that I can do in my career to make things easier? Finding things like a mentor, finding things like good books. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be books specific to cybersecurity. It can be on whatever that skill that's going to help you get to that next level. One of the books that we read together was Stories That Stick. Right. Stories That Stick is all about how do you convey emotion, how do you convey ideas and values in things like content. But when I looked at it, I was like, wow, this isn't just useful for folks that are in advertising or media. This is super useful for people in cybersecurity. When a CISO has to speak to the board, sure, there might be some technical folks there, but a lot of times it's going to be folks that you really have to break it down to its most simple components in order to get your point across.
Your background is in threat intelligence, and I see, at least from my perspective, the most people come to you that have a threat intel background or an aspiring threat intel background, and they come to you with almost specific questions. Sometimes it's about creating content, but other times it's about doing something very well, like really showing yourself as an expert. And you talk about breaking down a report. Like you used to create 100+ page reports, but how do you break down something that may be very long in nature to something that someone can ingest and really understand?
The first thing you have to realize is who is the audience that you're speaking to? Because if you hand an executive a 200-page report, they're never going to read it. They're just way too busy for that. So that's why you have things like executive summaries. If I have 30 seconds to understand what's going on in my network, if I have 30 seconds to understand what's going on out in the world from a threat perspective, what do I need to know? And so one of my favorite things is taking something that's really complex, maybe even taking someone else's work, and it's really long, you're like, wow, this is really good information, but I want to convey this information in the best way possible. So then you write maybe 250 words. You're like, okay, that's pretty good. And then maybe even go down to something as low as 100 or 50 words, getting all the fat off of that communication, just so you're really, really clear and succinct when you're presenting stuff to folks. When you want to get better at anything, it's about repetition. It's about constantly doing it over and over and over again and getting feedback. Right. Sometimes the feedback is going to be super useful and sometimes it's not. But I think the more feedback that you get for how do you break through in cybersecurity, the better.
So true. If you have the feedback, then what can't you do? You're understanding what are the deficiencies or what are the missed opportunities, and you're able to capitalize on them. What are the things that you do when you break in? A lot of time it's SOC. Maybe if you're lucky, you might be doing incident response or some engineering. But very rarely are you doing things like red teaming. Right. Or even purple teaming, where you're combining the red and blue together. And I would say even a lot of times the technical or the tactical part of threat intelligence, you might not do when you're first breaking in. But when you break through, you establish the credibility, you gain some experience, you start to have these opportunities. I remember when I was breaking in, the only thing I wanted to do was be a hacker. I wanted to break into all the computers out there, but for organizations, for the sake of goodness, and get paid for it. But I think breaking through is the hard part in my eyes, because getting an entry-level position is difficult if you don't know anyone. But getting a promotion is even harder, because your boss likely is not the person that referred you. So when you look at breaking through, what do you think people are most excited about when they look at their second or third opportunity?
I think just seeing something new, right? I think one of my favorite parts of learning anything is that new world to explore. I love that. I love being a student. I love starting over. I feel like the more you can put yourself in those new environments, those new paradigms, the better you're going to be at the end. Because I pull from a lot of different experiences in order to craft whatever Chris Cochran is that is breaking through. So when you think about breaking into cybersecurity, sometimes you got to put your time in. You're not going to jump right to purple teaming like, yep, I'm the best purple teamer in the world. Could someone do it? Absolutely. But you'd have to have so much aptitude in that space. A lot of times you're going to have to start on a SOC floor, being that first tier of the SOC, handling alerts. Sure, I mean, it might be boring. You might get tired of doing that, but it all comes with like putting in your time. Things above and beyond your work is where you start to grow. Like, okay, yeah, maybe I'm doing security analysis now, but I wanna start doing threat hunting. So I'm gonna craft my first hypothesis. I'm gonna take a piece of intelligence. I'm gonna say, what would this particular traffic look like in my network? See if I can find what it would look like. And you do, and you're like, oh, okay, wow, I can find it. What if I took that information and I was able to put detection logic behind it, so that now I don't have to hunt for it myself. I can just have the computer hunt for me. Then you go to that next hypothesis. It's how you build up. And then you can start to break through, because now you have experience. When you step up on stage, you have stories. In the beginning, when we first started doing like podcasting, if we tried to go up on stage and tell everybody how to podcast, people in a split second would be like, these guys have no clue what they're talking about. They're talking about, make sure you have 2 camera angles that's looking up at your chin, right? They'd be like, these guys don't know what they're talking about. But fast forward 3 years, after we've podcasted every single week, a lot of times, multiple times a week, we've bashed our heads against so many challenges. We've talked to different people. We've recorded in different locales. We've messed things up and had to fix them. We've submitted for awards and got feedback that we didn't make it. All of these little stories create the experience. They create the stories that you would then convey to other folks and be like, wow, that's great that you told me, because now I'm not going to make the same mistakes that you did.
I think that's the thing, is the public display of experimentation. When we started the podcast, we wanted to speak to very interesting people, because that would make us smarter. We would learn from the best of the best, and we could even share that with the world. When I first was trying to display my experiments, I started doing YouTube videos. I thought, I don't have the time to be an instructor and teach courses quarterly or regularly. I have time to do one video. What can I do it on? And so I started to do it on the things that I knew best, computer networking. So I would just make very short videos and explain these things to other people. And I think also going to conferences, conferences and doing a presentation, because you never know who you're presenting to. A lot of times we get nervous because we wonder if someone in the audience knows more than us. But they're there to be a collaborator. They're there to see how we can work together in our own way. We're gonna work together by me teaching you something during my talk, or maybe you coming up and saying, hey, I saw that you didn't mention this one feature of this tool that you're talking about. Have you ever heard of it? And then boom, you have more opportunities open to you at that point.
When I think about breaking through, I think about exists, right? The exist framework we came up with during one of our many think weeks, that EX, the explore, like figuring out what else is out there, because something that you're doing right now might not speak to you. But maybe if you do a little bit of a pivot, maybe you dabble in something else, maybe it speaks to you like, wow, I could do this all day. If I did this at the end of my day, after an entire day of work, I would still show up and have energy to do this thing. That's when you know, I'm on to something.
Right.
And then you immerse yourself, right? Being at the conferences, surrounding yourself with the people, the ideologies, the philosophies, the imagery of whatever that thing is, like just speaking to you, like, oh, wow, I love purple teaming. It is the best thing ever. So I'm going to go to the Purple Team Summit. I'm going to join the Purple Team Discord if there is one out there. I'm going to surround myself with it. And then you start putting the rubber to the road, making those mistakes, going into trying new things, building a lab, doing your own self-experimentation, and then ultimately get to that T, which is that translate or transform. That's how you stand out. You either translate the stuff that you've learned, your experience, you're teaching kids, you're teaching your colleagues, you're teaching people in your organization, maybe even you're teaching the C-suite or the board about this particular attack, like, hey, this is how it works and why we need to care about it. Or you're transforming. You're maybe taking whatever that field is to the next level. Maybe you came up with something completely new. Maybe you made an open source project that is going to help people do their jobs.
Right.
That's how you stand out. It's not about just me, me, me. It's about how do you provide value to the people in the community.
I'm laughing inside because you mentioned us having these unflattering camera angles coming from the bottom up.
Yeah.
And I'm sure whoever watched the podcast at that time was like, these guys might not know what they're doing.
No.
And I think sometimes when you're trying to break through, maybe you don't. Like, what are some of the mistakes that you think people make or take for granted when trying to break through and stand out?
You give up.
You give up.
That's the biggest mistake that anyone can have, because maybe you do have a genuine interest in this thing, but maybe your challenge is very difficult. If your challenge is difficult, you're going to fail more often than you're going to succeed. And that can be hard for people to swallow. A lot of times, I think, I don't know if it's necessarily this generation or just how accessible we are to information. We think things are going to come quickly. And a lot of times they aren't. At least the things that are valuable are going to come over time, over experience, trial and error, right? They get a couple of different certifications, they take a class or two, and they do pretty decent at a CTF. They try that first job, they submit their application, oh wow, they get a call back.
Right.
Now they're sitting in front, but now when they're in front of somebody, they're asking really tough questions that only somebody that has put the time in, hands on keyboard or trying a project would know, and you don't get the job. Are you gonna be dejected and just give up, or are you gonna say, cool, now I know what I need to do next time, and that's how you improve and do anything great.
I remember when I would say trying to break through in cyber, I was targeting Facebook, Google, all the big tech companies in Silicon Valley.
Right.
And for the life of me, I could not get a yes. It was heartbreaking, it was devastating. I'm from Maryland originally, a little small town called Odenton. It's very close to Fort Meade and the NSA, but this little small town I'm from is known for being a railroad stop. It's the halfway point between Baltimore and DC, and that's where the railroad stops, drops some people off, picks some people up, keeps going. That's what my city was known for, and I wanted to get out. I wanted to go to Silicon Valley because I thought that was the promised land. It was the Mecca. But every time I tried to apply, I got rejected. And I was only able to make it to Silicon Valley at some point through a referral, like leaning on my community. I would imagine for some people, that may not be the case. You may not know someone that's out in Silicon Valley or the target city that you want to live in, area that you want to work in. How do you get around all the rejections? Of course, not giving up, but what's the motivator?
I would say the motivator is that if you constantly are doing the right things and you're on the path of mastery, mastery is not a destination, it's a process, it's a journey. You're just constantly on this path of improvement. I think that your time is going to come. Because, for instance, my huge break in my career, I wasn't looking for it. I literally had started a job. I was in the hotel because I had to travel from Georgia up to Connecticut, and it was my orientation, like getting acclimated. That night in the hotel room, I'm sitting there relaxing, and I pop open LinkedIn, and somebody that I had talked to years before that, Alex Mastretti, he said, hey, Chris, it's been a while. We interviewed you for the threat operations role, and that wasn't necessarily a fit, but now we need someone to lead threat intelligence. I'm like, oh, wow, this is interesting. But I wanted to do my current employer justice. I said, hey, I just started a new job, always willing to have that cup of coffee, right? We hopped on the phone, started chatting back and forth about intelligence and some of the ideas, the philosophies that I had. He was like, hey, look, I know you're not looking, but why don't you just come out to Netflix? You got to come see everything. I was like, okay, I'll do it. I'll come out. And I was completely floored. But keep in mind, that wasn't an opportunity I was looking for. I went through a very stringent interview process, and I was selected. And I had just moved to Georgia not too long before that. We'd only been there for a year and a half. And now it's like, wow, I have a Silicon Valley company, like one of the top FANG company.
Right.
Am I going to change everything? Am I going to change my family's life? I'm going to change my life. But to let them know that, hey, I'm going to leave now because I have this opportunity to do something in Silicon Valley that I might not get again. Because think about it, when you're a lead for threat intelligence, a lot of times each company only has one lead.
Right.
They have one lead that's for each function. And so to get like one of the epitomes of technology and get that opportunity comes very rarely. But if I would have just tried Netflix once and never tried again, then maybe I wouldn't have had the opportunity or been open to it. Maybe I could have just quit. I'm like, you know what? I'm done with all this and do something else. But because I stayed the course, I built my credibility, I built my confidence, which is super important in breaking through. That's where I think a lot of stuff comes into play. Whether you're talking about interviewing for a job, whether you're talking about standing up on stage, presenting the research that you've worked really hard on, is projecting that confidence. But on the opposite side of confidence, we deal with a lot of imposter syndrome because we don't feel like we deserve to be there.
Right.
We tend to forget, or we tend to idolize what everyone else is doing, and we think everyone else is doing better or know more than we do, when in fact, there's a lot of things that we know that we could share with everyone. So breaking into cybersecurity is tough. Breaking through in cybersecurity is tough. And then we want a step further, and we wanted to break out, or sort of break out. I think we're still in, but we gave up our practitioner hat and we went the content creation route. And I think that is a genuine path for people to take. A lot of folks get into cybersecurity and they think the final destination is CISO, like CISO is it, or maybe being an entrepreneur and starting a company. But I think there's a lot of reasons for people to break out. What would you say is a good reason for someone to break out and whatever it means for them?
I think becoming a CISO is still breaking out of cybersecurity because you're not necessarily a security practitioner, you're a business enabler. You're someone that is really understanding what is the plight of the executive, what is the plight of the board. You're really understanding the customer a lot more too. If you were working at a technology company, maybe a big company producing a product, you might not have access to the customer, especially on the security team. When I look at breaking out, people may want to do it because of boredom, of being burnt out. You could only do the same thing so many times. That's why a lot of people switch from being a SOC analyst to something else, or even incident response.
Right.
Incident response is a grind. You might have to stay somewhere, lose your whole weekend, lose holidays, and then at a certain point, you're gonna have things that are more important or just other interests.
Yeah.
I think being pulled towards something else is why a lot of people break out of cyber.
Speaking of incident response, I remember the first time being on call, and I was like, all right, I'm on call for the first time. I'm just gonna do my best. You know, I had pager duty, was all set up to let me know when there was an issue.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that I had my phone on Do Not Disturb. And not only did I have my phone on Do Not Disturb, there was flags that was keeping some of the calls from coming through. So my first page completely missed it by hours, which is devastating. So imagine that at scale. Like you're on call week after week, you know, cycling through, you're handling incidents, handling things that are really tough. You're working on weekends, you're working on holidays, because the folks out there that are trying to steal our data, disrupt operations, they don't take time off a lot of times because you're thinking about all the actors around the world. Some groups might take breaks during this time, and some groups take breaks during that time, but there's always someone that's looking to take advantage of your network, take advantage of your configurations, take advantage of you. And so when you think about how much of a grind cybersecurity can be, it's largely reactive. We talk about getting proactive, but it's hard for a lot of teams to get proactive because there's just so much that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So people might get tired of that and might want to do something different. When someone says, hey, are you sure you want to be a CISO? Are you sure you want to go into the ultimate leadership route because you have different skills that you're now leveraging. You're understanding things like P&L, you're understanding things like business objectives, and you're putting the fun stuff onto the people that you're leading. Now they're making the decisions. You provide the business context and maybe help guide them and groom them to go to that next level. But the fun stuff is largely gone from your workday. So I do think that that is one way to break out. Sometimes I do feel like people get into cybersecurity because you can make a great living. It's fantastic. You're taking care of your family. You're going on nice trips. You're getting great comp packages. You have great benefits. But at the end of the day, it might not be who you are at your core. Or maybe it was at one point, but now you're like, there's something else that's out there. With us, I felt like that's what kind of happened to us. We talk about scale all the time. We talk about leverage. I love leadership. I love teaching people about leadership. I love teaching people about performance. And I could do that as a CISO for a team, being really focused and grooming them and making sure that I do everything I can to put them in the best position for their next role or whatever they're looking to do. But I feel like with content, that was our opportunity to scale. It was our opportunity to not only share our experience, it was our opportunity to share the experiences of others. So I think that whenever you find that thing that speaks to you, sure, there's a risk to pivoting out, but if something is calling you in that direction, and you know that inspiration, that passion is going to have you persist, like constantly, I don't care if I don't want to do it today, I'm going to do it anyways because this is what I want to do. Those are the people that are successful in breaking in, breaking through, and breaking out.
Yeah, when you look at breaking out, I think you can also look at being a kid again. You know, I started elementary school playing the saxophone. I used to love playing. I played for about 4 years, and then at a certain point, I didn't enjoy it as much as I used to. I wanted to learn how to play other instruments. I think it's very synonymous to cybersecurity because you might start out learning about the SOC or maybe networking, and then you move into incident response, threat intelligence, architecture, maybe you become a CISO, but at a certain point, you're gonna want to play the symphony, have the orchestra play all the music, and along the way, when you become older and more wise, you also learn more things. And over the course of my career, I've learned more about music, I've learned more about film, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could combine these things together?
Sometimes I wonder, you know, we made this pivot into content. Is there going to be a point where I go back? And if I'm going to go back, do I have to break in again? Because now the skills that I used a year ago might have changed. There might be some differences. There might be some context that I don't have. And now I have to reacclimate myself to that position.
One breaking out of cybersecurity that I see that's pretty similar to ours is sales. A lot of cybersecurity practitioners may venture off into vendor land and work for a vendor and start building security products. And then they realize, hold on a second, I would enjoy selling these security products. And when you look at the enjoyment, that's one thing. But there's also something that always sweetens the pot, and that's more money, right? Money is a great motive to do something different. And I think that is honestly one of the top reasons why I see people not break out, because they love the opportunity and the money, or they have a bigger opportunity, a bigger paycheck somewhere else. And you know, that sometimes you're surprised with how quick you see people leave. I mean, and in both ways, right? Because the money might make people stay, but it also might make people leave. It really just depends on your situation. And you hear about golden handcuffs all the time.
Golden handcuffs, making sure that you stay with an organization for a while because they don't want to be left holding a bag. And they're like, oh, the brain trust, the IP, the intelligence, the wisdom, the experience is gone. Let's say you go through an exit, right? You go through an exit and you're like, oh, finally I'm done. Like, oh, no, you got to stay for 2 years. I think people are counting the days, you know, when their golden handcuffs are going to be over. But one thing you just said that really is super important for people to understand is that when you're going through this whole process, right, we talked about communication. Let's say if you want to pivot out of cybersecurity and you want to be an entrepreneur, You have to be able to communicate. You have to communicate the value. You have to communicate your why for this company. You might have to communicate with VCs. You might have to communicate with the community. If you're going to be a CISO, you have to be able to communicate with the people that you're working with.
Right.
If you're going to do content creation, you definitely have to know how to communicate. So I think when you're going through this journey, like taking those rare skills, like you talk about all the time, is super, super important. Because there are skills that probably in my back pocket that I haven't used in years. But when that time comes, I'm like, oh, wait, I remember how to do this. And then boom, here you go. That's how you break in. That's how you break through. That's how you can break out too.
Would you consider becoming an entrepreneur, breaking out of cybersecurity?
I think so. The way I sort of think about practitioners is like you're doing like the work. You're doing the analysis. You're doing the incident response, or you're doing the compliance. When you become an entrepreneur, now you're trying to serve those folks.
Right.
You're like, okay, these folks have this problem, and I think I know how to solve it. And usually it's through some type of engineering means, maybe it's a service, but I think you do break out of being a practitioner, because if you then go from being an entrepreneur, trying to go directly back to being a person that's doing the work, it might be tough.
Right.
Like if you spent 5 years building this company, and all of a sudden, 5 years later, you're like, all right, I'm gonna go back to being a security analyst. There might be tools that you've never used before. There might be things that, not to say it's impossible, because we talked about mental agility being one of the most important things for a cybersecurity practitioner, but going back might be tough. And then you have to break back in, you have to learn. Like, you might have to get a certification. You might have to find a mentor again. So when you think about things that change in cybersecurity, being an entrepreneur is different, being a CISO is different, going completely out of the realm of cybersecurity is definitely different.
Right.
And if you want to come back, you have to start over in some ways.
I think what we're most divided on as a community is breaking out. Breaking in, everyone's trying to help. At least that's the perception. You know, that's what people are doing when it comes to presentations, talks, LinkedIn, where we live. But I don't see a lot of people asking for help on breaking out. I hear a lot about people being burnt out. I'm burnt out, I'm doing the same thing, or maybe I don't have an understanding from my team, my organization isn't investing in the right areas and it's leaving us vulnerable. You hear that all the time, but you don't necessarily hear about anyone asking for another opportunity. It could be like biting the hand that feeds you. You don't want to ask for help doing something else and making a pivot.
Sometimes that's just the chance you have to take. Sometimes you have to follow your heart. Sometimes you have to follow your skills, your passion, the thing that you're good at. And that's not always going to sit well with everyone. But I think for the most part, the tribe of cybersecurity is going to be there and say, hey, even though you're going off to do something else, we got your back.
You almost lose confidence in everything else. Like, can I actually be successful outside of cybersecurity? I know for me, it is very scary to think about not doing anything cybersecurity related. There's something special about it, because even when you look at someone like Elon Musk, he has a true passion for learning and performing. And I think when you have that mindset, then what can't you do? You can learn anything, and as long as you can show that you can provide value, then you can also sell it too. You know, one thing that I'll say also on top of it is, whenever you were pulling me out of the practitionership and being so technical, there was also opposing forces. When you try to leave a job opportunity, sometimes they'll throw more money at you. They'll say, oh, well, hold on. If the money doesn't work, what other incentives do we have? Maybe more vacation time. There's going to be opposing forces. And I think that is going to reveal, you know, what is the best opportunity for you. You talk about family and also having a house. I think sometimes that goes into the equation of what you love to do, is also, where do you love to do it at?
Yeah, where do you love to do it at? What are the things that you're responsible for? It might be hard to make a pivot if you're worried about feeding your family and things like that. So I would always advise people to make smart bets, right? Make smart bets and measure your success, right? If you want to become a content creator, I hope you become a great content creator and really see, like, what is the value that you're providing to that community? If you're going to pivot and become an entrepreneur, what is that thing that you can help solve in cybersecurity? When I look at the whole process, breaking in, breaking through, and breaking out, honestly, there's a lot of inertia. There's a lot of inertia on the front end, people trying to break in, they just can't, they're trying to figure it out, they're getting advice and they're seeing that it doesn't work. Sometimes it does. Whether you're trying to stand out, maybe they don't know how to show up as their authentic self. They don't know how to convey that confidence in the experiences they have. And then when they're trying to break out, they're afraid because that's a risk. They don't want to lose everything that they've built up over time. And I think the more we talk about being free to move, freedom's important.
Right.
Freedom to work where you want to work, freedom to do the things that you want to do, freedom to take risks. You get one life. You might as well go as hard as you possibly can, make memories, meet awesome people. And honestly, I think that's what it's all about. But I think the more we have conversations like this, the more we invite people to say, you know, what if I did that? Or imagine if I took something like X, Y, and Z and I made a company out of that. I think the more we talk about this stuff, the more inspiration people are going to get and change the game in cybersecurity.
What you said is freedom. And I think that's what we all want at the end of the day, is to be free in what we do. Free to break in, to break through, and break out. So cheers to freedom.
Cheers to freedom. Being free.